Handy if I turned my microphone on. That would have been great. Don't know why that was mentioning hard boiled eggs. Actually, I do, but oh boy. Um, Thank you so much for dropping in this evening, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. Treppins in chat. It's 4 a.m. Really hope you didn't get a notification from us and it woke you up. I'd feel terrible. Um, but wow, 4 a.m. That's mental. And welcome along. San, you didn't see the technical glitch there. You didn't see the fact that I forgot to turn my microphone on. We're just going to pretend that didn't happen. Um, if you are new around these parts, then welcome. My name is Declan. I am one part of D8 Dungeon, uh, a group of Irish tabletop role playing game enthusiasts, and we put out several different shows across Twitch and podcast platform. So if you've ever stumbled across Romancing the Dungeon or Rise of the Forsaken or Saving Grace, that's us. That's what we do, along with a few other streams and shenanigans and hijinks and stuff like that. We're uh, multifaceted, or we're just busybodies. Not quite sure where we fall there yet, but we'll figure that out. Um, DM notes is something that I mean, I think I said this was our first episode, but I actually did an episode of this back in December or late November last year, and it was something that I was really really interested in, kind of maybe talking about, um, and it's really just a chance to talk a little bit about my processes as a DM and things I've learned, mistakes I've made, and maybe offering that as an input. I'm not going to sit here for an hour and tell you that I'm an expert and that I get it right all the time and that you should follow exactly everything I do. That's not that's not what this is about. This is simply a kind of a glimpse into my processes and, more importantly, other DM's processes. So over the course of this series, I am hoping to maybe sit down and chat with other dungeon masters and get a feel for how they approach different topics or different uh, elements to their table and to their sessions and to their games. Um, I kind of figured it would be interesting maybe to start with world building. It's I think it's one of those things that's a little bit daunting if you're not used to homebrewing or you haven't done much homebrewing before. And I am notorious amongst my friend circles as being the person who picks up a modular adventure, who'll pick up something like Curse of Strahd and just take it in a different direction. That's not to say there's nothing wrong with modular adventures. That's not to say there's anything wrong with playing out a game as it folds out for you and your players. But for me personally, I'm a big believer of putting my own weird stamp on the games that we play and kind of adding my flavor to it. I think most DMs add their flavor to the game. They'll do their own bits and pieces. And speaking of homebrew, homebrew show is here as well. And if you this is only going to be an hour, and if you want to see some real homebrew in action, you need to go check out Homebrew Quest directly after this. So just as a heads up, uh, that's the link to their YouTube channel. So make sure 8 o'clock. You can set a reminder. Head on over. Ben is doing lasers and feelings. I keep always going back to lasers and felines because that's the one I ran where you're cats and you're not in space. Well, you could be in space, but not in this version. With some special guests, so you're going to definitely want to check that out, and some really amazing guests, all of whom I think they're all DMs. So you never know what you're going to pilfer from those guys. So do make sure you check that out at 8 o'clock this evening. Um, onto the onto the onto the topic at hand. This world building is huge. Okay, and it's not something that you can cram into a 1 hour session. And if you can, great. I'll go watch your videos and steal how you did it. I won't. I'll borrow heavily from it, rewrap it, and call it my own, and then regift it. Um, so really, I was going to maybe take this in pieces, and what I kind of wanted to talk about, and this really, whether it's a homebrew or a modular adventure that you've picked up, or that you've paid for, whatever it might be, this can be applied to that. You can kind of tackle this into it. And this first part is going to maybe focus on your needs as the GM, the game master, dungeon master, storyteller, whatever title you like to give yourself. And or whatever title your players refer to you as. And if it's not God, then you're not doing your job right now. I kid. I kid. Um, our our whole point of this is to maybe kind of look at what are your requirements based on the kind of game you're going to be running, the kind of session you're going to be having. And part one is going to kind of focus on that. We'll be looking at the differences between building a world for a campaign, an adventure, one shots, and then giving you kind of my take on it, how I've kind of applied that process. Uh, I'll be talking to you a little bit about where you can pull fine details from your game from. So how you can, if this is something that evolves from a one shot into an adventure, the adventure evolves into a campaign, how you can start kind of threading all these bits and pieces together. I'm going to show you a couple of useful tools, things that I use on a fairly regular basis. And then if there's any questions or answers, or if any other DMs out there have comments that they want to throw in, then by all means, please please shoot them into chat. I'd love to see what your take on this is, because this isn't an hour long lecture. I do enough of that September to June. This is a chat, and it's a conversation about creating tabletop role playing game content. And the best way to improve at that is to talk to other DMs, talk to other players, and sit in on these different things, and kind of take the parts from each other that work for us, and mold them into our games and stuff like that. So I'd love to know what your processes are. And if there's anything I say in the middle of this that you're like, I don't do that, that's stupid, this is what I do, then tell me, because I'm absolutely all ears. We're going to start by taking kind of a look at, I suppose, how we might classify uh, the session at your table. And you might be kind of looking at that, kind of going, campaign, and adventure, and a one shot. Well, they're all adventures, Declan, so you're just stupid. For me, I also live for self depreciation, so don't worry about it. I'm totally secure in myself. I just like to knock myself down a couple of pegs every now and again. Campaign, obviously, we're talking about a something ongoing. We're talking about a full game. We're talking weekly, fortnightly, maybe you're daily. I don't know. Maybe it's monthly, but it's an ongoing long form story. Okay, your one shot is, as it says, it's a one shot. It's a 3 hour session. It's a quick game. Now, I'm gonna preface that with a big old asterisk. Okay, I'm terrible at one shots. My one shots always become a two-parter, possibly a three-parter. Welcome along, Edwin underscore Sue. Nice to see you. Nice to have you here. But you're talking about that formula of a standalone session. Okay, so it's the group are in the tavern. The group are paid to go beat up the bandits and rescue the mayor. There we go. And what unfolds in that 3 hours is self-contained. The adventure sits in the middle of that. The adventure it can be anywhere from like maybe 3 sessions up to maybe 10 or 12, depending on your players and depending on what they're aiming to do. But it's a fairly self-contained piece. So based on that, then you're going to be looking at different requirements for world building. And again, this is from my own practice. This is from my own processes. Campaign is ongoing, and that's going to mean that you are going to need, more than likely, multiple spaces. So multiple locations, regions, countries, cities, towns, even planes. Maybe your players are going to be crossing dimensional paths and going into the fire plane or a hell plane or whatever it might be. A campaign like that is going to take a lot of planning details, and editing. And that's a crucial part, that it's an ongoing process. It's an edited process. So you'll be adding stuff. You might be rewriting stuff. You might be chopping stuff out entirely. You might be stitching and gluing bits and pieces all over here and there. But it's a long form plan. Okay. Your adventure is 3 to 10 sessions, usually tied to a specific region. And you might be kind of limiting what kind of working knowledge the players might need outside of that. So they're part of a kingdom. The kingdom is being attacked by tribes in the mountains. Well, why is that happening? So who are those tribes? What are those mountains? And then from that, where are we looking at in terms of the kingdom itself, and why is there animosity between them, and filling in that space. Okay. And then your one shot is usually confined to a very specific area. It is going back to that: the tavern, the town, the bandits lair. And you'll map out those three. And that can be an actual map, or that can be mapped notes that you are going to be working from. So looking at those three things, the thing that they're going to have in common is that all three require you as the DM to have an understanding of the space that your game is operating in. And in modular adventures, you're fortunate. You're getting that kind of mapped out for you. But the best modular adventures don't add all the dressing to it. There's always room for you as the dungeon master to add, to change, to tweak, to meld and mold. We're all kind of familiar with the open world games or sandbox games. That's, again, depending on what your take on this might be, that might be enough. You might confine your players to a kingdom as its sandbox. It could be quite a large, expansive realm, but allowing you to flesh that out. Okay, so the first thing I need to establish as the DM is, what is the length of my game? Okay, what am I looking at in terms of the duration, the amount of sessions this is going to take? And if this is going to be a campaign, well, as I said, it's going to take the most amount of planning, the most amount of details, and will require a good deal of editing. Beyond that, I ask myself 3 questions. So when we're talking about world building, I will always, regardless of whether it's a campaign, an adventure, or a one shot, I will ask myself, what am I writing for? How long do I need this to be? And what is the tone of my game? And those are 3 very basic questions that you should be asking yourself, regardless of the duration, the length of the piece. Okay, so what am I writing for? Okay, well, is it a campaign? Is it an adventure? Is it a one shot? Okay, and that then leads it into, how long do I need this to be? Well, it's an adventure. I'm aiming for 10 sessions, so I need the kingdom, I need the outlying regions of it, I might need 2 or 3 villages, and I need to know a little bit about the kind of the culture of this area. The third question is actually probably the hardest one to kind of maybe pin down, because you can decide whether you're doing a campaign or a one shot. You can decide how long that campaign is going to be. You can decide how long your sessions are going to be. The tone of the game is something that's going to evolve over the course of that game. Now, one shot, you tell me it's a one shot horror. Well, we know to kind of expect horror going into it. With the tone, what we're talking about here is the tone of the world itself. What's happened in it? Okay, what's happening right now in these events? Is there a plague? Are 2 kingdoms at war? Has there been a magical calamity? Has an ancient unevil awakened? How much of that information has begun to spread through the world? So why would a kingdom in the very, very northern regions surrounded by mountains in a tundra know that, thousands of miles away, a kingdom is being attacked by there's two kingdoms at war with each other over a jilted bride. Hey, Cromdor, welcome along. Um, so, what what's happening in the world as you see it? And you'll always have a picture. And what we need to kind of maybe talk about there is, what are you trying to achieve with the world that you are creating? Do you want, is this something where there's been a lot of peace for centuries or millennia, and now this great evil has awoken and its shadow is spreading across the world, and one by one kingdoms are falling to its influence? Well, then the general consensus there might be that the further this evil reaches, that maybe your villages, maybe your towns, maybe your kings and queens are going to get more desperate. Maybe they're making pacts with the evil and stuff like that. Um, Question from Edwin: to enhance the tone, focus of the campaign, do you restrict the players in their choices of races, etc.? I actually, I don't think offhand, Edwin, I've ever restricted the players in terms of their choices or races and stuff like that. I as a DM, my viewpoint on it is that players can play any race in the game. They can play any class in the game, and I will make it work. And I'll actually come to that. That's a really good question. If you don't mind, I might hold the second part to that for the very, very end. So if I don't get back to the second half of that question, prompt me again, because I have a little Q&A thing at the very end. But I do want to speak to that because it's quite interesting. You, the players are the anomaly in that tone, and I, as a DM, and I think if any of my players are watching, um, or might be in chat, it's something that I struggle with quite a bit. I I like to set a tone for myself. This is my approach to the game and the story and the descriptions and the world and the place that they are in and the people that they are dealing with. I have no sway over how the players are going to interact with that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ramifications or consequences. So if I have a player playing a wood elf bard who's the atypical trope, let him play it. Let him play it. But what happens when that bard wanders into the war chamber and tries to try it on with the queen while she's in the middle of very tense diplomatic relations? Probably, at minimum, going to get his ass dragged out of the chambers and forbidden to attend. Worst case scenario, depending on the mood of the queen and how things have gone, executed. Who knows? I That's a discussion I would have with my players at the very, very start. This is what I'm aiming for, but this is your world as much as it is mine. So let's see where it goes, and learning that who they are and how they fit into the world is crucial to what we as a group of people telling a shared story are trying to do. So that's kind of the angle that I come at it with. When it comes to the point of those three questions, for me, it has those three specific aims. So I get to I get to understand my world a little bit more, and with that, I I know how much work I have to put into this. I know what I need to be doing in order uh, to get a good sense of what this is and what's needed or required. And secondly, I get to be able to focus my attention on what's needed. So if I'm creating a one shot set in a small village that's beset by a werewolf curse, I need the village. I might need I do need NPCs, both those pleading for help and those who might be trying to aid the werewolves. I need the werewolves, and I might need their lair, their surrounding area. Are they in the woods? Are they lost in deep hills or ruins? And I craft those. I'll craft that world specific to that one shot and where I might go with it. And tonally, for something like that, I might be doing a little bit of horror. I might be going for maybe a little bit of, maybe it's even kind of Victorian Penny Dreadful inspired horror. So I'll start to look at that world and take that into it. But I know what I need. I've sort of done a little checklist for myself that these are the things that I need, so I can focus on that. And the third thing, and this is something that anybody I think that has ever created their own world, depending on what the size of that might be, whether it's a small hamlet in the middle of the woods to several planes of existence all set around one world and people that travel in and out of it. It's setting expectations for yourself as the creator, as the writer, as the game master, that there are things that you can do and there are things that you can't do straight away. And I'm a one of my biggest downfalls, and it's one of my biggest weaknesses as a DM is over preparing. And I don't know if there's anybody in chat that maybe that DMs that maybe maybe you have the same issue. Maybe you go in with a binder full of notes on the local area, the local history, and the monsters and the NPCs and their relationships, and it's it can be a huge amount of content, and you might be very proud of that content, and you might be, you know, I mean, because it's great. It's a wonderful, fulfilling, creative outlet. But there's absolutely nothing worse for me, anyway, as a DM, when the players don't engage with even a third of it, and you're like, I've sunk hours into creating this space to make it feel real, to make it seem uh, like a thing that people can be a part of, and they didn't talk to the old hermit in the woods. They didn't go near the abandoned shrine that I hinted at. They didn't even go into the tavern. It's those elements to it that I would be struggling with. That I've done all this work, but I didn't need to do a tenth of it because I needed to know where my players were, where they're going to, and what they are going to do to get there. And I might have to shift the goal. They might decide that they're going off to do something different. That's fine. That's the nature of what we have to do as game masters, as dungeon masters, and that we're holding hands. Um, my early question tying into overpairing. If I go, okay, players can be any of the Wizards of the Coast published races. It is a lot of work to give them all a spot. It it is, and it can be that kind of thing of, well, uh, what if do wood elves all live in this part? Do orcs or half orcs live in the mountains, or are the dwarves there as well? And what's happening with them? Um, what I would say, Edmund, from my point, because I used to literally have like kind of sections where, well, if you go here, it's going to be predominantly halflings, or yeah, we can't call them the other H word, but halflings. And if you go west of this, you're going to be in predominantly human or kind of half elf territory or whatever it might be. I just started muddying it up. Um, that's kind of life. That you know, fine, you might find that a city or a town has an overwhelming population of Aarakocra, but might be strange if there isn't anybody else filtering through that town, through that village, through that city. Who are the Aarakocra doing trading with? Are there diplomats coming in from other kingdoms, and so on and so forth? Are there little districts setting up? And you'll start to suddenly see that space that you're creating gets fine. It could be by and large a 60% Aarakocra space, but what's the other 40% made up of? And looking at how that works and where that kind of goes. And that's an interesting way, but looking at creating the characters first and then making the campaign. Yeah, because one thing that I haven't one race that I haven't touched on in Romancing the Dungeon, the podcast, are the Warforged. I don't have Warforged. Nobody has expressed interest in playing one in my world. And I've actually got a really funny idea if we did do it, because I could make it work. But I won't say no to a race. I'll take the challenge of great. This is what you want to play. This is what you want to fit in. Let's talk about this. And I'm going to get to that point when it comes to the players. This is the example I'm going to give you when it kind of comes to my processes as a home brewer. And uh, I I like to think of my world, any of the worlds that we're talking in, and I'm going to be predominantly focusing on the world of Arcanum for this example. But it's the same with Rise of the Forsaken and the world of Down that I have in that space. The world is a very small place. I like to think of it as a very small place, and what I do from there is I just make the places within it big or real. And when you do that, when you can kind of localize the space that the players are in, the world kind of fills itself. It starts to feel a little bit bigger, and there are some really nifty little things that you can do, or and that I've kind of started doing in my campaigns. And it's using whispers from other parts of the world. Maybe one city has a newspaper and they're talking about maybe they're talking about a devastating plague in another region of the world. Maybe there are traders or diplomats coming through talking about a visit from a royal emissary or whatever it might be. But letting your players be kind of hit with a few speckles of information about what's kind of happening around them in that space. It might be just the city itself. So for me, and what you're looking at here, and I hope this is, yeah, that's working great. You're looking at the world of Arcanum, and this is the working information that I started with. So it's divided into 5 expansive kingdoms or regions that contain various terrain types. By and large, gods, the new ones, are revered, but people get on with their lives. Science and magic are kind of muddled. So some call it science, others call it magic. Some people mash them together. Some are purists, some are purely academic. But it's a melting pot of ideas and energy and the sciences. And there are older texts and lore that acknowledge the creation of the world of the first and their gods, but this is largely steeped in myth and legend. And I have a little world map, and you can see there that there's the regions kind of mapped out those 5 specific land masses. So you've Ain, Talis, Rothoham, the Kingdom of Visage, and Galeshire. You have the Wastes, the Northern Tundra, and the Southern Tundra, and Misthian. Okay, so those are all the other places in the world that are in existence that are happening. Okay, that there are NPCs and events taking place every single day in my world in those areas that my players might never know about, but I can have just boiling over or simmering. We don't want to boiling over, simmering over in case I want to pull something into the world and make them aware of it. We start to take the world as a small thing, and we start to now look at a particular region. And I'm looking here at the Kingdom of Galeshire. So if we go back to the other side, you'll see that the Galeshire is on the southern tip of that region on the right. And you're now looking at a regional map for this kingdom. So what do we know about Galeshire? Well, it's ruled by a monarch. So there's King Argus and Queen Jane. It's largely based on European cultures and regions, so French, German, Irish, Scottish. Its capital city is Galeshire, named after the kingdom as well. It's to the east of this land, and it's found kind of on the edges of the Dragon's Back Mountains. Its second largest city is Tezrab. Tezrab, which you can't see in the picture, but Tezrab is found to the very west beyond the shores of Lake Capulet. And Lake Capulet is the second lake, or sorry, is the last lake on the left. So the second largest city is on the other end of the other end of this continent. And between those two masses of population and of commerce and trade and politics, there are loads of villages and towns and hamlets that sort of mark all aspects of the region. And again, my players creating a character would get this information, that they would know this is the region. So you've seen the world, this is the region, and this is where we're starting. So this is where the very first couple of episodes of Romancing the Dungeon were based. They were based in the village, although this is probably more of a hamlet, but they were based in the village of Erb. And Erb is to the northwest of Tezrab City, about 70 miles away. Um, it's a small farming village. It was once an old dwarven mining settlement, but the Swallow's Cave wasn't particularly fruitful. Some workers stayed on, and the settlement expanded into the village, retiring from mining to become farmers. Erb is overseen by a brother Sops, a priest of the Temple of Ordu. There's one tavern called the Prancing Mule. It's a typical old man pub run by Ella Dargan. It was, for a time, an out of the way, dull, and lifeless spot with a dwindling population as the younger generations moved to bigger towns or Tezrab. That's changed though, and word has spread. Erb has become quite a happening spot. Huge parties take place every single night, and the once assuming little village has become the place to be. So, the first part of this campaign took place here, and everything revolved around kind of two buildings and the woods to the north that you can see. So between the Prancing Mule, the priest's house, I think, is it called the Priory? Is that what they're usually called? And the caves and the mines just to the north of the village there that you can see. Everything took place in that, and they encountered Brother Sops. They encountered Ella Dargan, and they help flesh out this place. And the other thing that they encountered other villagers, other random villagers that, whether they were aware of it or not, they actually helped create. My players helped create these by asking me, who can I interact with? Well, I know straight away that by and large, the vast majority of people in this village are farmers, maybe hunters, but the vast majority are probably going to be farmers. It was quite a slow town, but now it's become a kind of a bit of a happening nightlife spot. So you're probably going to be dealing with a very hungover farmer. And lo and behold, we met Swamp Eyes, and her name wasn't actually Swamp Eyes; it's just what we called her. No worries, homebrew. Best of luck with the stream. We'll be jumping in 20 minutes, or thereabouts. So cannot wait to see what kind of shenanigans you get up with. So from there, I let them interact with the local militia. They interacted with the local vendors. They interacted with Ella, and ultimately Sops. Sops was the big anchor for this world, okay, for this space that we're in, or this place that we're in. And Sops was the reason they were all there. He had a job for them to do. He lied about that job. No spoilers if you haven't listened to the first season of Romancing the Dungeon. But he lies about the job that they're on, and there's a whole lot more going on, and they have to kind of figure that out. And when we were talking, when I was talking to the players about the village of Erb, I asked, had any of them been there before? Had any of them come by it? And out of the 4, only one said that they had been there in the past. So that player got a little bit of extra information. They knew kind of that they were the ones to probably be more suspect of the fact that this was now a quote unquote cool spot to hang out in. And going in, they were able to bring that to the others and show off that what they knew about it as they kind of arrived. And Treppins, though the people of Erb now have a very, very distinct lack of greasy little peanuts. I actually don't think Erb is there anymore. If you've listened to the second season, Erb is definitely not standing. We might have to figure that out. We might have to revisit Erb. But I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, here's the world, here's the region, but here's where the first maybe 6 sessions of my game took place. And beyond that, there were events happening in Tezrab, and there were events happening in Galeshire, and there were events happening in my world. But my players are focused on what's in front of them. The characters are focused on what's in front of them. And whether they have knowledge of things beyond the perimeters of this village, great. But they are focused with having to deal with a priest who lied about the job and maybe putting an end to the events of um well, go listen to the first couple of episodes and you'll, yeah, greasy little peanuts is a wonderful way of summing that up. I hope that kind of makes sense. And kind of the example that I'm giving, that focus on what's needed straight away. Look at opening that world up, but where are they going to be and how do you flesh that out? And this is where the fine details start to come in. And fine details are my favorite thing, to really bring into a world. So we know you're writing a campaign. Okay, we know the mood and the tone that you are going for, and we know that you've even created several locations, regions, towns. You've a space mapped out for your players to go and exist in, to play in, for their characters to run amok in and cause chaos. Okay, we know that's happening. How do you add to these places? And this is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm not embellishing that. I'm not just saying it because I'm talking about it right now. But it's genuinely one of my favorite things to do as a dungeon master, and as somebody who loves to homebrew. First thing to note is your world is living. The second thing to note is your NPCs are part of it. And this gets to Edwin's a point that I was kind of maybe going to come back to. Um, your players are also a part of that world. And if it's something like asking the players to come up with their characters first or their races first, and then using that information to feed into, well, these are the dynamics of the world that I'm creating for you, that these are the races, they're the most populous, they are the most this is what exists here. And there might be a few others dotted around, but by and large, this is what I'm going with, this is what we've established. Or I don't have Warforged, or I don't have Artificers. That sort of science doesn't exist in this space. I'm going for high fantasy with zero tech, and that's totally fine. And you'll notice here that for the last hour or so, I've kind of been talking predominantly about fantasy. I've dabbled in, we'll say, kind of modern gothic horror. I Vampire the Masquerade is one of my other favorite systems to play with, and I'm looking. I want to revisit a campaign I used to do in college, set in um, late late 19th century Paris, all around the time of. And yeah, this is super super gay of me, uh, but all set around the time of Moulin Rouge, and vampires at the Moulin Rouge, and I'm talking about the Nicole Kidman, Ewan McGregor Moulin Rouge, um, but I want to go back to those 3 points. The world is living, your NPCs are part of it, and so are your players. And I kind of maybe look at what that means. I hate this phrase, and if anybody here works online, you'll have heard this phrase quite a bit. A living document, and predominantly thanks to the pandemic and whatnot, we were always listening to, or I was as a teacher, always listening to policies being living documents, and it'll be amended to reflect the changes, and so on and so forth. But there's something important about understanding that the world you've created is a living world. As big as it is, as small as it is, it's a living space. Okay. And what I mean by that is it isn't entirely set in stone. You are its progenitor, you are its creator, you are in charge. So you get to determine these set facts, set knowledge, set world around it. Um, you get to do that, and you also get to decide what's more fluid. And when we talk about stuff being fluid in the context of world building, I like to talk about it as threads. And I'm well versed in homebrewing. I've been doing it. I've been homebrewing worlds and stories and places and gods and everything in the middle and between, since I started as a DM 18 years ago, 17 years if I'm close enough to it, 17, 18 years. Um, and leaving threads open allows you one breathing room. You actually get to take a breath and kind of go, okay, this is enough. I have a good understanding of the space that we're in and what's needed. Great. I can add extra. I can take things away. If it's not coming up and it's not going anywhere, I might just put it in a separate document. I might put it in a separate notebook and I might come back to it. Um, but the most important thing with having threads open is you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to have everything tied up. Because if everything's tied up, it leaves very little room for players to kind of explore and expand. And in the world of Romancing the Dungeon, and I'll give you an example of it. I talked there about there being old ones or first ones and new ones. These are what we call the gods. And I actually mentioned one there. Brother Sops is a member of the Order of Ordu, a god, the god of order and sort of logic, and just kind of like balance. It's just he's a fairly nonplussed god. He's fairly relaxed about everything. It's just keeping things in check a little bit. Usually, mayors, ministers, councillors, and so on and so forth like that are, you know, would have kind of maybe studied their philosophy and their teaching of the ways. And Ordu is a new god. He has never come up in the world of Romancing the Dungeon, but he exists in my head and he exists in my notes. And if the players decided to go near that, we would talk about that and I would expand it out. The best example I can give to you of that is, again, without going into heavy spoilers, but there's a death in the middle, or no, in the but around the kind of the first third of season 2 of a character. And one of the players was challenged with writing the eulogy. It's a custom in this city that, for some reason, um, people who just kind of wander into the funeral, guests at the funeral who maybe kind of new, are asked to kind of share their thoughts on not the dearly departed, but just on life and death itself. So James, who plays Kyle, was a new introduction to the campaign and the story and the world, and asked me, "Who's the god of death?" And I didn't have one. There was no god of death um, until he asked me, and I was like, okay, I know there's a god of death. There has to be a god of death because there's a god for generosity and kindness, and a god that looks after the poor called Brogue. So who's the god of death? Okay, rummaging through my head very very quickly. Oh, there is. His name is Finn, and Finn is a big giant celestial whale that swims around in the heavens and gobbles up souls and then brings them to the afterlife in his belly. And if he deems a soul being impure, he doesn't send them to hell or anything like that. He just holds them in his belly, um, and until they've kind of served some penance, and then he brings them to the afterlife. Literally, Finn did not exist before that conversation, and Finn has now become an interesting part of this campaign, and I can't go into it because it hasn't happened yet. But Finn sticks around. Um, so I've kind of jumped over your NPCs being a part of it. So I'll focus on the players for a moment. The type of game matters, as already discussed: campaign, adventure, one shot. But look to your players and their characters. And I'll always ask players for, after giving them enough information on the world, the space, and the story that we're playing, now you give me your characters. You tell me who they are. What are their goals? What do they want? What are they aiming to do? What do they believe in? What have they experienced up to this point? Because all those things are going to shape the way they act and behave in that space. So a character who was blessed by the gods from a young age and was heralded as a prodigy and has now gone on to become a world-renowned sorcerer. Well, why are they in my campaign? Why are they now traveling with this bunch of, you know, young adult adventurers on their first trek throughout it? Oh, it's because they've been tasked by that. They've actually annoyed their god, and they signed a pact with a warlock. They're now a warlock, and they've signed a pact with a patron. And who's the patron? Let's figure that out. So you take the characters' backstories And like your open threads, you now look at ways of tying your characters' stories, your player characters' experiences into your world. And that does two things. The first is that expands on what you've already done. It gives you a bump of inspiration, and kind of a kick to take the story to another place, to flesh out this other part of the world. And two, it creates a sense of immersion with your player and their character and the world that they're going to be in, no matter the length of it. But it gives them a sense of what is happening and who they are in that space and what it means to exist in that space. So to go to the point that we were saying earlier on, when Edwin had asked about players and their choices of races and stuff like that, maybe your world, maybe there's a region where magic is outlawed, and you have a party of two spellcasters, be it a cleric and a wizard. Well, what's going to happen to them when they go to that space? If they have to go to that space, maybe part of your adventure is going to take them there. How are they going to get around that? What are the penalties? What are the punishments for that? And it's not that you're setting those players up to be aware, to be hurt by the world that they're going in. They know going in, and they should know going in, that there's a chance that we could go here. Here is a place where your class, your ability to cast arcane energy is not liked. It's forbidden. It's against their laws. You're going to have to keep that in check, or you're going to have to figure out a way to cast in secret. For it'll make verbal magic a lot more fun. But like your players, your NPCs are as much a part of that living world. So why is the mayor corrupt? What is it that they're getting out of selling the town down the river to a mining company that's looking to expand its reach into this area? What are they going to do when confronted with the players? If they give over information, what kind of information do they have? What do they know about the outlying area? Can those NPCs that you've created, that you've put into that space, add anything? And again, to go back to the first few episodes of Romance of the Dungeon in season 1, Brother Sops was quite knowledgeable about the area and had even gone out to do additional research, particularly on that cave that was mentioned. But he didn't give all of it up. He didn't tell them everything until he was literally held at knife point. And I guess it's just that idea of your world being a living thing is something that I think we would all kind of maybe benefit from remembering. Treat that world like a real space, and look to where your players can influence it, look to where your NPCs can influence it, and look to how you get to influence and tie those bits and pieces together. And that's going to make for some really interesting stories and a really interesting space to play in. And what I would say to you is, and kind of maybe Edwin, just from my experiences, your handle on getting the players to create their characters first, really interesting way to do it, because they're shaping that world, whether they're aware of it or not. They're shaping that world, and they're having a direct influence on what you are bringing to that adventure then as the DM for it. So it's a really interesting kind of approach to it. And again, for anyone that might be doing it differently, that's not to say that Edwin's way of doing it or my way of doing it are the correct way. You are the DM, you're the game master, you're the storyteller, you're the world builder. You get to decide what works for you. And what I would say to you is, ultimately, as long as your players are enjoying themselves, as long as it's fun and it's you're being respectful of each other and that space and the time, and that's the other thing of it, the time that goes into this. And even if it is just a one shot, a lot of energy goes into that, manifesting that space, creating it, making it feel real, because you want to immerse your players in it. And my best tip when it comes to that is letting them have some sway in the world that you create. It always makes it a little bit more. I'm going to come to your questions, Treppins, in just 2 seconds. I'm just going to mention these four useful tools that I use on a fairly regular basis. The first is, and I don't know if everybody's going to be familiar with these, but Don John's Fractal World Generator. It's a way of creating a map very, very quickly. And I'll put these up in the Discord. If anyone, if you're not on the D8 Dungeon Discord, you can find it. I don't know if you can search for Discord. I don't know how you can search for Discord channels, but there's surely some way of me. There's probably a code that I don't know that James has set up. There you go. There's an invitation to it there. I'll pop these links into it after the fact anyway. So it creates, not only does it generate a world map for you, it can actually create landmarks and spaces on that world already. And then I've used it in the past as a way of kind of kickstarting my inspiration, giving me a kind of a good, okay, this is the world. Now I'm going to take that and rewrite it for me and for the space that I need it to be. So really useful way of just kind of maybe even giving you kind of a kick up the arse and giving you a bit of inspiration. Microsoft Word and the review and comments ability. I don't know how many people use Microsoft Word for when it comes to writing their campaigns. Maybe you're old school. Same thing. It's the equivalent of writing in the margins, I suppose. And I use the review comments in Microsoft Word for two reasons. It helps me link into my notes so I can see where things are coming from. I also use it for reference images and tracking the changes that I made. And I talked about this being a living world. It's a world that will get edited and will see some adaptation over the course of the adventure, over the course of the campaign, even over the course of the one shot, depending on if you're going to come back to that space time and time again. So the Microsoft Word review and comments are things that I use quite a bit. Fantasy name generators, if you're not quick on your feet with coming up the names of places, really useful resource. Also works for like character names, names of cities, towns, villages, so on and so forth. And you can stylize them. You can go Elvish, you can go Dwarvish, you can go Celtic, you can go Asian. You can kind of set what kind of direction you want to go with. So if you get caught in a pinch when a player asks you, "Oh, what's the next town over? Have they been attacked? Like what's happened to them?" And the barkeeper can say, "Oh yeah, X has been attacked. They fell, several weeks back, and we've got some of those towns refugees staying with us at the moment," and so on and so forth. So again, just really, if you don't find it easy to come up with names for things very, very quickly, that's a good spot. Also works for NPCs as well if you're looking for a quick way of naming your NPCs. The last thing, it's kind of a guilty pleasure, and then I'll go to come to some of the questions because this is only an hour. I think one, I really want to watch Homebrew's one shot this evening, and two, I'll be murdered if I do any more streaming outside of the anything else that I do these days. So stationery, and I love a good notebook and a pen, and I will write everything down, and I take inspiration from everything, like literally everything. I was out for a hike 2 weeks ago in a place in Ireland called the Burn in County Clare, and we were trekking up and down flat rock, looking down over into some beautiful countryside. And I just had this wonderful idea for one of the campaigns that I'm working on, and it really sparked a good sense of that space that I want to take the players to. And yeah, I'm going to change it. Yeah, it's going to be more desolate. It's not going to be fertile. But it made me think about the story, and it made me think about hey Gregor's man. It really made me think about the space that we were in, and I wanted to take that and move it on. And I didn't have a notebook and a pen with me, but I did have my phone, and I actually wrote a couple of notes in my notes app on my phone as the space that we were in, what I was thinking of, what kind of direction I might want to go with it in. Even the name of that next adventure kind of came to me. So what I would say to you, and having your phone with you is great. And even if you don't like writing things, recording yourself is a great way of, and yeah, look, it's a stereotype. We always see those movies with journalists and they're their handheld recorder, it does work because, um, like I said, I've been doing this for nearly 18 years. I'm in my 30s. I'm starting to forget things. My memory is not as strong as it was when I was 20, 21. Um, so it's useful. And I might not look at it the next day. I might not look at it for a week. I might not see it for a couple of months, but it's there. And the next time I open that notebook, the next time I open the app on my phone and I see the recording or I see the notes that I've written, that inspiration hits me again, and I'm taken back to that moment. I'm taken back to that space. Um, there were a couple of questions that I didn't get to, and there was a couple of questions that I was asked on our Discord server. So sorry, Gregors, but if you've just joined us towards the end, but this will be available on the channel afterwards as well if you wanted to watch back any of it. But Trepin's question was, how do you manage to keep track of world consequences, especially when an action or inaction by the players may have far spread effects? I start with my DM notes, and I don't play a single session without a notepad in front of me, whether it's my tablet, and I always have my tablet to hand, or I have a notebook at hand. So I will always have one of those next to me, and I am writing things down. So, and I think I'll give you a working example of it if that's okay. In season 2 of Romancing the Dungeon, one of the questions that Roz poses to the players in her dating survey is, tell me a secret. And I promise I won't tell anybody. It was obviously for her Gossip Rag magazine. But in those answers, Kyle, played by James, said that he heard a rumor that a prominent, acclaimed wizard had fraudulent qualifications, and that they were a sham, and that they really weren't as celebrated or renowned or respected for that, and that they had stumbled onto somebody who had stumbled onto somebody who had told them this, that there was questions being asked about this particular wizard's qualifications and academic background. And that might seem like, especially if you've never listened to the show, completely out of context. But if you have listened to the show, you'll know that Roz Greypurse is the narrator for what we do, and she's the love wizard in Romancing the Dungeon. The rumor that Kyle had kind of implied that Roz cheated in her final exams or faked her thesis. I wrote that down and just left it there, and I was like, that's a really interesting thing to do. What would that mean if a wizard's qualifications were called into question, or their abilities called into question? And at the moment, I'm currently planning a 3-part adventure with 4 different tabletop role-playing individuals from all over Ireland and Europe to find out what happens to Roz Greypurse in the Roz Greypurse Before School special. So we're going to go. That has had that one comment that a player made in a flippant survey had a real impact. Because if you've been listening to the show regularly enough, you'll know now that Roz was she faced investigation, she was questioned, she was taken away from her business. She's now she's now facing a tribunal. Her business has been shut. It's now been taken over by the university that she came from, and there's now a super pleasant, horrible lady running it. So there is those little things, and it was a comment that he made that it just ticked a box in my head, and I went, "That's interesting," because Mistine, this university exists, and now we're getting a chance to go there and explore that, because I haven't been able to explore it before, but now we're going to get to do it in this part, and it was because of that. So a pen and paper or your tablet in front of you, and I can't stress how useful they are, because in the moment, as a DM, in that moment, it can be very difficult to kind of go, okay, what's happening? Like, how is this tying into elsewhere? And I've with Romancing the Dungeon and Rise of the Forsaken, there are things like I said, simmering away in the background. Some things that the players have had a direct impact on, whether they're aware of it or not. Their actions or inactions, as you put it, Treppins, has allowed me as the DM to kind of go, okay, this is going to shape how this person's going to interact from now on. Hi, Pixelate UK. Thanks for dropping in. We're close to wrapping up at this point, but the video will be available to watch afterwards as well. But thank you for dropping in. There were a couple of questions over on our Discord, and I do want to get to one or two of those. Fiona asked all of them. She asked a million of them. So I might even try to address the ones that I don't get to now, because the homebrew show is starting on a little bit. But what's your favorite aspect of a world to create? I don't have a favorite aspect. I love those little details. I love all those little bits and pieces that kind of give me a bit of I don't know, a thrill or a little bit of creative pleasure, whatever you want to whatever you want to look at it. Is homebrew stressful? Homebrewing is stressful. There's no point in saying it's not. Okay, homebrewing is stressful, but it's also a load of fun, and it's something that if you take your time with, and you really allow yourself that time, and like I said, managing those expectations that you have with it, that's the crucial aspect of it. And kind of being good to yourself there, that you don't have to have it all done straight away, that you can build that world out, you can allow that world to become a little bit more each session or in between sessions, that you can add stuff to it, and you can wait and see what players ask. What do players need to know? I'm trying to find a campaign that is based on Labyrinth the movie, but I'm finding it hard to get a good one. That would be interesting. That would be really interesting. See, this is the problem. Now I'm sitting here going that would, yeah. Now I'm thinking, yeah, yeah. So my brain now is going off in a completely different direction. The other question that the Fiona asked, that I really want to kind of maybe kind of touch on, was, where do you draw inspiration from? And I already kind of mentioned that I'd already kind of mentioned that I love kind of taking inspiration from lots of different things, but there's always this sort of idea, and again, coming to Pixelate's comment there about a campaign that's based on Labyrinth the movie. That's inspiration. My brain fired off in 1,000 different directions, and you could catch it in my eyes when I got very distracted, but that's the nature of homebrewing and taking those bits and pieces. And I was very I don't know how, I don't know if anybody in chat watches the FX series Pose, all around the ballroom culture, and in the mid to late 80s, surrounding queer POC lives in New York. But huge fan of that series, and that has inspired me. That's inspired me, particularly around characters and emotions, and telling stories that kind of evoke feeling in people. Even the idea of kind of the last film you watched, whether it's Labyrinth the movie or Everything Everywhere All at Once, and you come up with an idea because you saw something that's kind of flicked a switch in your head. That's something you should sit down and write out a few bits and pieces about. And I take inspiration from other DMs and other games. And when I'm watching stuff or I'm listening to stuff, and I'm like, oh, that was really cool. That's like that was a really class thing that they just touched on there. I'd love to maybe see if I could take that and put my spin on it and put my take on it. That would be that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong, like this idea of, I have to come up with the next big original thing and the next unique thing, and it has to be this. If you're inspired by Critical Role or The Adventure Zone, any of those things, Dimension 20, that's great. And if there's a particular thing that they did that you want to try out for your game, try it out. Like, what I would say is, there's a big difference in replicating something and making something your own. So when you see someone, another DM, or you see something in a film, I always find it's very difficult to replicate that same feeling, that same emotion I had when I watched it. But I can take how I felt when I watched it, or I can take what they did, and I can put me into it, and I can take that and put that into my world. Um, I am I have gone way over time, and I do. I hope this was at the very least interesting, if not helpful. That maybe I've said one or two things that have clicked. Um, Maybe I didn't say anything that clicked at all. But I do want to just very quickly remind you uh, who we are. And we are D8 Dungeon. We are a group of Irish podcasters and streamers. Uh, and we've our show Romance the Dungeon. It's a podcast available on all platforms. We stream uh, multiple times a week now, but our shows go out fortnightly. So we've Saving Grace tomorrow night, which is a gothic horror set in the same world as Romancing Dungeon, but with a darker sort of twist. And then on Mondays, every second Monday, so next Monday coming, we have Rise of the Forsaken, set in a completely different world, with a different cast and lineup and everything. So they're ongoing. Um, Thanks so much for joining me. I actually genuinely, and I have no problem admitting this. I was like, there's got to be nobody. This is going to be like my lectures. There's going to be like maybe one or two people, and one of them is my mom. So I really do appreciate you dropping in and keeping me company. And like I said, hopefully you've maybe pulled something from the this chat. I do want to very quickly draw your attention to the gang over at Homebrew Quest. They're going live now. And Homebrew Quest are another bunch of Irish tabletop role playing games. They are phenomenal. And if you want to see a DM in action, pulling hijinks left, right, and center, then look no further than Ben and the gang at Homebrew. They're brilliant. So hopefully I'll see you over there in their chat. And again, my name's Declan. You've been absolutely brilliant. And I'm back in 2 weeks for the next part of world building. And I'm going to maybe talk to you a little bit about kind of culture and developing the idea of making the world a little bit more tangible. If we're talking about the physical world, now let's talk about the world as a cultural space and how you might operate within that. So hope to see you then. And if not, I hope to see you online or at another one of our streams. So have a good evening, or Treppins in your case, a good day. Bless you for getting up at 4 a.m. And I will talk to you all very, very soon.